Welcome to the Well Prepared Life podcast, where we dive into the fundamentals of readiness for life's challenges, covering topics from personal responsibility to mental and physical preparedness and beyond. Let's forge resilience, nurture growth, and embrace responsibility on the journey to the well-prepared life. Welcome to another episode of the Well Prepared Life podcast, where we forge resilience, nurture growth, and embrace responsibility on this journey to the well prepared life. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Kyle. And last week we talked about basic skills you need for, basic emergencies, just in case something happens. So we talked a little bit about, how to assess the situation. You need to be able to make quick decisions quickly. Building a fire that stays lit.
Yeah.
We talked about,
fire making, water purification.
Yeah, water purification, self-defense, basics, fitness, definitely a big one.
Yep.
What else were we talking
CPR,
about?
basic first aid, trauma first aid, like those things where it's like you could use them in any situation. It could be like car accidents and places where it's like if there is a shooting near you, like having the ability to help people that are around you and help yourself as well.
And that's just for like common, not every day, but very likely emergencies, like you said, car crash, if a hurricane hits, something you need basic skills.
Things that we see happen around us, whether not to us exactly, but in our general like vicinity and like things that make it on the news, things that are like not unfamiliar to us.
Yeah. So what is the next step, if there is a next step?
Yeah.
The next level.
From like thinking about it from a situational standpoint, I actually do think about like one of the situations that is happening right now is like Hurricane Helene.
Yeah.
And so it's like you have that first step of like, okay, how do I deal with like the immediate trauma of a situation? And how would I make it through that immediate first situation? And then you have the next step as far as like, okay, I have multiple days, weeks, maybe even months, hopefully not months, but like definitely days and weeks that people now have been going through this where they're like, I don't have easy access to fuel, clean water, everyday items. I don't have a shelter. I don't have a home. Things that like goes beyond just the first initial thing happening.
So this is more like, are you starting to scavenge for food at this point? Are you starting? Okay.
Yeah. So like, I kind of think of it. So kind of like I said last week, as far as you have the practical skills, the hard skills of things you can actually do. But then you also have your soft skills. And I think your soft skills are still the most important thing because they're where you start from.
Okay.
So keep in mind, like already having the like assessing the situation, making decisions, that's already there. So we have those skills that we're working on and developing already.
Right.
The next set of like soft skills, I would say, is like, how do you like keep up good morale in the midst of like bad situations?
Always positive and encouraging.
And like not even necessarily you have to be like the optimist, chipper, like super positive person, but it's like, how do you be like, hey, we're going to make it through this.
That's good. Okay.
Like, hey, we will figure this out. We're going to work together. Like it's hard.
Yeah.
It's like, I think it's having a good outlook without ignoring the problem. Because you have like the optimist sometimes like stereotypically can just ignore the problem.
Right.
And they're like, oh, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing happening. It's all fine. And it's like everybody around them's like, it's not fine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Okay.
And so it's being able to recognize problems, but then respond and like have a good attitude in the midst of bad problems.
So realistic outlook, but also resilient. Being able to see the next steps and see that there's an outcome.
And like keeping up like a positive attitude of like, we can figure this out. We can figure out what's next. We do have the ability to like make it through this.
Yeah.
We're going to work together.
How do you just practice that kind of positivity whenever you're stuck in traffic?
A lot of it is self-awareness.
Okay.
As far as like, are you getting to a spot where like, this just isn't going to happen anymore? And like, or we're like, as far as I don't know if we can make it. And like, you need to be honest. Like, that's the hard part too, is if you honestly don't know if you can make it, it's okay to say that. Yeah. But we're going to try as hard as we can.
Where you're like, I don't know the next steps, but we got to figure something out. Let's take some time.
And I think the morale is like continually seeking to move forward and not just stall.
Okay.
Because if you're moving forward towards solutions, that tends to keep people, we're like, oh, we're doing stuff. We're making changes. So sometimes that may involve, say there's like not a lot that can be done in a certain situation. You're sitting waiting for help to come, people to bring water, something like that. Well, you need like stuff around the camp. So there are things that can be done, but it's like finding the person who's like sitting kind of wallowing and just like they're really hurting, they're sad. you have the conversation, you're like, hey, I know this is hard right now, but we need you. Like, we
Yeah.
need you here with us, and we can make it through this. And so it's like finding things for people to do to help them keep their mind off of stuff. So it's like,
Gotcha.
so are you the person
Like a
that
purpose.
when like people around you are struggling, do you just join them in it fully? Like, without ignoring the struggle, but do you just like, I'm going to sit down right there with her. We're going to like wallow in whatever is happening around us. Or are you the person that's like, hey, let's like help figure out what's the next step and give people ideas and purpose. So it's like an idea is like, hey, we need to go gather firewood so we can be warm tonight.
That's good.
And it's like having people like, instead of just sitting around in the boredom of a moment or in the, I don't know what to do, giving people like purpose and things to do that can help them stay focused on like, no, we are moving forward. We're making progress. It's going to be better.
I've heard a analogy. Does this apply here of like, you got to be the thermostat instead of the thermometer?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
I would say
can set the temperature.
Yeah. I would say when it comes to morale, that's the goal.
Increase morale. Yeah.
Of like the people who want to be the well-prepared person, the person that's leading in that situation is you're the thermostat.
Yeah.
You are setting the temperature of where people are at.
Okay.
You're not just responding to it.
Nice. Okay.
The next mental skill with this is teamwork. In the sense of like, do you involve other people? And it's kind of builds into morale, like I mentioned a little bit, as far as like, are you finding things that like helping people work together? But that's like both in are you leading people to like, we all accomplish something, but also are you including people well? Do you find that like, if you're in a group of people, is one person constantly getting left out? And what's the impact for that? And while that seems like, okay, maybe that's not the most practical for a like emergency situation, I'd actually say, no, that is like essential. Because one, if you're not like having people work together, you're missing out on the help that those people can give. Okay. So it's like it helps everybody when everybody helps. If that makes
everybody
sense.
feels included. They all feel like they contributed some piece to the
puzzle. By working together as a team, often you can accomplish more than you would if it was just you trying to do everything by yourself, or you and like one other person that you trust more. But two, it then builds into that morale component. If people feel like they're a part of the team, a part of the group, they can then work together to like overcome the situation.
Yeah, that's good.
And they can keep morale up.
Conflict management, would you say something like that? Because I could see a lot of people.
It's like part of leadership and teamwork. It's like being able to like communicate with people in a way that helps people. Like sometimes you're just going to have conflict. And so it's like, it's going to happen and you got to work through it.
Yeah.
And doing that in a way that doesn't push people away from each other, but like, is like, hey, we're all upset here.
Helps them. Yeah.
Like this is tough on everybody right now.
Emotions are real, they're valid. You need to talk through things. So yeah, that's good.
But then in sometimes being like, hey, this isn't the time for that. We need to focus on like getting out of this bad situation.
Right.
And knowing when is okay to like process through something and when it's time to just like, hey, we need to work right now.
If water's rising, that's not the time to address,
It's like, when's the time to like talk and when's the time to move?
That's good. Yeah.
It's kind of like knowing the difference.
Another soft skill, knowing the difference of when to.
And that's like assessing. That's like assessing the situation, making decisions quickly.
Yeah.
It's like knowing when's the time to figure stuff, like to talk and process, and when's the time to move.
Yeah. That's good.
Kind of getting into some of the like hard skills side of things. I do have like the first one on there is like getting food. And so
makes sense.
Like in a emergency situation where it's like that, I do think there is something to be said for like knowing like what plants in your area you can eat and foraging and things like that, where it's like, can you just like go find something that you can eat and know how to like clean that and eat it?
Yeah.
Hunting, like it's like
stay healthy and
so like
nourished.
I put in like gardening, hunting, fishing, like as far as your immediate things like hunting, fishing, like edible plants, foraging, like those are all things that you can do in the moment for food if you need it and you don't have any. And then the things that look a little bit more long term where it's like, hey, like the hard part with some of this stuff is like we don't have a situation currently where it plays out in the sense of like gardening is a way to get food, but that takes time.
Yeah.
And so if there's a situation where you're in a spot where it's like you need to go like get food, like I think there's something to be said for working ahead. So it's like you have a garden in a situation where you need the food later, and you have a way that so it's like you're already working on those skills. But then there's also just a sustainment element of gardening, where it's like you're not dependent on a store for food. If the store if there are shortages, like that's like your more long-term emergency kind of situation. If there are just consistent shortages,
like another COVID,
lockdown,
Ukraine,
where you're like supposed to stay on your own property, like, and you have a garden on your property, that's one, a good healthy way to get outside and do things, and two, a good way to get like food if you do it, especially at a little bit larger scale. It doesn't need to be massive, but like if you have like a half acre or an acre, or even
size.
less, like you can grow a lot of food. Like there are stuff on like, there's people I've seen that's like somebody took a third of an acre and like grew so much that they had to sell some because they had more than they needed for vegetables and stuff like that.
Now, what about like the little planter boxes? I've seen those. I think they're like, is it worth it? It's a couple strawberries or a couple.
Those are better for like your
beans.
mindset than it is for like any type of sustenance kind of thing.
Is that like a good first step if you're trying to get into it? Maybe start with something low risk.
Yeah, it's like low risk. You're learning, but I wouldn't count on that for like I'm sustaining myself off of
that's
like a foot long garden box kind of thing.
A couple plants maybe.
Yeah, so that would be more so on like the learning how to garden and figuring that out. So those are your like your ways of like getting comfortable with it, and or like herbs and stuff, herbs and like medicines like that. Like there are like medicinal herbs that could be helpful for.
That's true.
That grow in small, like aloe vera comes from aloe plants, and it's like super easy to grow that from what I've heard. And there are other herbs that also help with different situations, like some that help lower there's like some that have like some of the similar benefits of like aspirin, like in a plant kind of thing. Nice. And like
pain relief, is that
pain relief, a little bit of blood thinner type stuff. So it's like knowing what those are, which I don't know much about that. That's one of the areas where I want to grow in, and that's kind of alongside of like foraging edible plants, knowing what plants do what and what can help you in what situations.
What about water? Do you need to find like more sustainable sources of water?
I think that's kind of goes back to your basic stuff
basics?
As far as purification and like knowing how to do that. And
there's not a next step for that.
The next step would be getting better equipment that can filter more water faster.
Okay.
Like as far as like, as far as doing the same thing, but at larger scales.
Gotcha.
Would be like the next step for that.
Okay.
I do think like building and basic construction is like one of those next steps. We talked about like knowing how to use a hammer last week. Well, do you know how to like build a small like structure? Like, could you build a shed?
Standing.
Like, but like, could you build a shed with a shelter that's fully enclosed and maybe a little insulated so that's like my house got washed away, but I still have a little bit of land. Can I set up a small foundation with some gravel and build something that can keep me warm and like keep me safe? And that's similar to bushcraft, but maybe going more to like modern stuff, depending on what you have.
Like you're talking like an A-frame type?
I'm talking about like if you just actually like, say like Lowe's and Home Depot, you're able to go there, but you don't have a home anymore. Like what are you doing?
Yeah.
And how do you handle that situation?
In a temporary, because like you're not going to buy a house 2 days later,
or it's if it's in a situation where you're like, I need some like, do you know how to build a fence to keep people off my property that I don't want on there? Do I know how to like basically like build things that are helpful to me? Like for me, like one of the things that I want to build soon is like a chicken coop. Where it's like I could buy one, but I can also build one.
Keeping animals off that might get into your garden, like various, okay, I get you now. Various use cases.
So like building is good. General medical, so that's getting into like stuff that honestly is like not that complicated, but like you should know a little bit more about. So like treating like semi-serious injuries, like broken bones and like deep
splints.
cuts, like splints, but also like, do you know how like, and this is stuff where it is getting into that more intermediate realm, but it's stuff that I think most people can learn of like, do you or people in your group know how to like sew a bad cut shut? Like as far as, and do you have the stuff to do that?
Stitch a wound.
Like, can you stitch? Can you do stitching?
I gotcha. Yeah.
Because like if you can't go to the hospital, but there's still a big gash, it's like you need to do something about that.
Right. It's not amputation, but it's something that is like blood loss will hit.
And kind of along the similar lines, do you have like decent wilderness hygiene? Like, do you know how to stay clean when everything around you is dirty?
Right.
Because that's harder than it seems.
Yeah.
And so taking like with that wound, being able to clean up yourself so that you don't get stuff into it, and then be able to like stitch it up and take care of it.
That's good.
But then also like from the medical side of things, like, do you know how to like, do you have the medicine to help with this? And then do you know how to like manage like general sicknesses that are maybe the stuff you would want to go to the doctor for, but you can't. So like flu and like things that are like get a little bit worse. Like, do you know how to manage those symptoms in a way that the people will be okay on the other side of it? It may take longer to recover.
So what do you do with that? Like, is that where you find medicine and
part of it's like just preparing ahead of time of making sure you have stuff. Part of it might
Symptom
be like
relief.
Foraging and like knowing what plants can help people with different things. But it's like, it also could be like, do you just know like they need when to put a blanket on them, when to take it off? As far as if they have a fever. It's like, when is it appropriate to help cool them down? When do we need to like heat them up?
Right.
And help, like as far as, and knowing what to do in which situation. at just that like basic
gotcha.
level. Because you could get into like the more like severe stuff, but that's when it's actually better to like, do you have a friend that's a doctor? Like that's where you get into like the bigger stuff. But it's like, do you know what to do when somebody's like sick and has a fever, but you can't get to the hospital?
I feel like hypothermia is a big one that could be
Yes,
pretty
that's
common,
a good
something
example of that.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what to do when somebody is like in a like comes out of
Yeah.
a hypothermic like incident?
Yeah, I feel like that's a common, or frostbite. That's you know, weathering the elements that are pretty.
Yeah,
I feel like that could be a more common, but not
yeah. You know how to deal with
super
like
common. You know,
element-based injuries.
sunburn, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, those are good examples. Great
Okay,
examples
sweet,
of things to know how to deal with that, especially severe sunburn, because that's like when you can get like second-degree sunburn.
Oh yeah, like
It's
sun
brutal.
poisoning or
Yeah.
something. Yeah,
So it's like, how do you deal with that type of stuff?
yeah.
I think that's great. Another area that is like most people might not think of is like basic communication. So like there's a lot of people in like Starlink is the main way that some people in North Carolina right now are able to talk to anybody.
Oh wow.
Like cell networks are down because power is out. Internet is down because all the lines have been like washed away or cut in different places. There's just not a way to stay connected with people outside of it. Starlink is great because it's a satellite communication.
Yeah.
But it's like if you don't have power and you don't have a battery or any way to run it, you're still like, how do I communicate?
Yeah.
People in that area are using radios a lot.
Yeah.
Both like regular walkie-talkies, but also like slightly nicer. And by slightly nicer, I mean actually cheaper than a lot of walkie-talkies, but like Baofangs, which are like a cheap Chinese radio. You get into like ham radio stuff, which, and if you didn't know this already, like, so there are some licensing requirements for ham radio, but in emergency, none of that is necessary.
Oh really?
Like, yeah, there's literally written into the
FCC's not
code.
coming out.
The FCC that says like, these don't apply in in an emergency situation.
Okay.
Like anybody can broadcast in an emergency situation.
All right.
And I take that to mean like any broad
National-
emergency situation.
Natural
like,
disaster.
like you don't like, some people get really particular about it and uptight as far as like, are you in immediate danger? It's like, and you're like, no, but my house burnt down and I'm sitting outside of it and I don't know what to do. And I'm trying to get help for people to come help me.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, or in situations like
power.
that, like
Yeah.
I'm stuck behind a road, like we're safe, but there's stuff like I don't have access outside of my house. That's an emergency.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like anybody that
not
might say something
standard.
otherwise, like they're wrong.
And no other communications available.
Yeah.
Especially that.
But yeah, so like, do you know a basic, like how to use basic radios, just like walkie-talkies, and like even just the idea of basic frequencies as far as like, what does it mean to like, what channel, like there's FRS frequencies, family radio signal.
Okay.
Those are what your typical walkie-talkies are on. Could you get on one of those channels on a device that's not a standard walkie-talkie? Like, do you know how to do that?
Yeah.
Like, it's not that hard,
Like a
but if you don't
random radio.
know it at all, it's
Start
like,
hitting buttons.
yeah. Once like, do you know how to scan frequencies on a radio to be like, where are people talking? Then I can hop in and be like, hey, I need help.
Yeah. Monitor.
And then if you take that to the slightly next step, as far as like, do you and the people you live near have radios, and what's your plan for using them?
That's good.
As far as like, do you use them like, hey, we have a bunch of people live in a neighborhood together. I have enough radios in emergency, divvy them out to them. And then it's like the person on the end of the street, it's like, hey, somebody's here that we don't know, radios back so that like people can come out. Or it's like, hey, help's here, come out to this place. Like food's ready. Like they got the stuff. And it's like
That's
a
good.
way to communicate when we don't have text and cell and stuff that we would otherwise have in normal life.
Yeah. I like that.
And just using it in basic senses, and like you can get extreme. There are a bunch of people that are super into radio. I like radio. I have a couple of things with that. I'm like working on like getting the higher tier of license. So it's like stuff that I enjoy working on. I'm nerdy about it. Yeah. So like 3 tiers, but I have the basic one right now. So you can get into it to an extreme.
Yeah.
But you don't have to. Like you can just literally have it for like
Just emergencies.
just emergencies.
Okay.
And it's like
Might do that.
communicating with my neighbor down the road.
Yeah.
That I like, if I need to, it's like, hey, can you come help me cut firewood? Or it's like, hey, like somebody fell and I need help. And this is like after a situation like Hurricane Helene, where it's like they don't have access to cell network, where they would normally just text somebody. That same thing.
We could probably do a whole episode on like the radios.
Oh yeah, that's its
of,
whole.
Like what kind of get, how much range can you get?
Yeah, and there's a lot of information out there on
Yeah,
that.
there's a lot
And
of
so if
YouTube
I was to do
videos.
it, it'd be like, what's the simplest version of it?
Yeah.
Like a basics kind of thing. And there's even some good basic
References.
stuff. But it's all like there's one guy that I listen to. He's like, you look at the use, what you want to use it for, and then figure out what does it best. And that's kind of how you look at it as far as like, what do you want to accomplish? And then find the radio that does that well.
That makes sense.
Because like, honestly, like from a technical standpoint, Starlink is a form of radio.
Yeah.
It's a satellite radio.
From ground to space. Yeah.
And that fills a lot of the roles that people are looking for. Now, what that doesn't fill is if people around you don't have Starlink, you can't talk to your neighbors.
Yeah.
So like that's where Starlink allows you to talk outside of your local area to the internet and anybody else that has internet. But if you need to talk to somebody that's like a mile or so away, like your little walkie-talkie is probably best for that.
Yeah.
And then like there are pros and cons to different types of radio for different situations.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Last thing kind of in this sense, and then I'll like kind of do a big picture stuff as far as like another thing I think is good. If you have community that you know you're like going to help support each other when like emergencies happen, mutual defense is also something that I would say is like something to keep in mind as far as, do you know how to shoot with somebody else?
Oh, okay. So like a team.
Like, and like, as far as like one instance thing that happens that is more common than most people would realize, but it's one of those things that happens to just few enough people that like, it'll probably never happen to me.
Yeah.
And it's like, it hopefully won't, but is the idea of like home invasions. And a lot of that's personal. You're not calling your friend. They're not going to make it over in time. Like it's similar with the police, like as far as like the police are not going to make it there in time, but think an emergency situation, people are desperate. There's possibility for more people. And it's like, we're all together in the same place. Say you did prepare, you have some extra food, extra water. Have you thought about what it looks like to make sure that you like protect your people and the stuff that you provided that will keep them alive?
Yeah. So you're talking like if your neighborhood is cut off, but somehow somebody else comes in and tries to
like steal from you or hurt you,
okay.
Take advantage of bad situations.
They see it's an emergency. They're like, oh, I'll take advantage of that.
Yeah. And so thankfully we have not seen much of that with Hurricane Helene, at least not any that's like made it public, which I think is honestly encouraging. I think some people in like the preparedness emergency world would have expected more of it. But people by and large have been more helpful than harmful to each other, which is very good and encouraging to see.
But it does happen.
But it does happen.
So at least being aware and knowing the tips and tricks to like kind of get a leg up maybe.
Yeah. Like my basic use case for this is to say, like you have a neighborhood that you're all kind of cut off, not able to do anything. I think it's wise that you have somebody that's on watch. And like whether or not they have a firearm, but more often than not, it'd probably be good for them too. But it's like somebody on watch. And then what do you do if like, hey, we have some people that's like are trying to like steal our food? What do you do? And how do you respond? But the bigger thing with as far as the shooting specifically is, do you know how to interact with guns safely in a group of people?
Not just at a target range, always pointing down range, like because you're going to be moving around.
Yeah, it's like, do you know how to like
flag somebody?
Yeah, do you know how to be safe with firearm when you're in a group of people outside of a flat range situation?
Yeah, okay.
And that's more so what I mean as far as like shooting with other people.
Firearms always down. Like is that the basic principles?
The basic principle. I mean, it's like you follow the gun rules, safety rules as far as like always shoot a firearm if it's loaded.
Right.
Don't point at anything you're not willing to destroy. I know these, and I just always forget the order and how to say them exactly, but it's like, don't put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot and know your target and what's behind it.
Yeah.
So those are the rules. And so if you follow those, you will be safe with the firearm. And there are techniques for doing that well. So it's like, the big thing is like, keep it pointed at the ground. Don't be walking around just with it sideways.
Put the finger
and
in
keep
the
your
guard.
finger out of the trigger.
Yeah.
And that's getting into more specifics, but it's like the idea of, if you are in a situation where that's necessary, do you know how to do that in a safe way?
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's like, I think a good big picture view of some of these intermediate skills. And getting into that spot where you're like, your emergency is going from like a day or two to like weeks and even months possibly where you need to rely on people. And the kind of like the question that I use for the title of this episode is, and like, cause I thought this after we recorded the first one, I'm like, I think this is like, your goal in emergency is to be an asset, not a liability.
That is so true.
And so that's
be a liability.
And so that is the goal of the well-prepared life, is we want to be assets, not liabilities.
That's good.
And so how do we grow our skills to be people that others can rely on and trust in situations that are hard and need like people with certain skills? And how do we do that well?
Yeah. That's good. I like that.
Yeah. So I think that's what it means to live the well-prepared life, is to be an asset, not a liability. And these are just some of the ways that we can do that.
Like how can you use your skills that you have today and then use that in, whatever situation? And how, if you don't have any skills, what skills can you gain? This is a good like groundwork for that.
Yes.
Like what skills do you need to start working on to help contribute to the community around you?
Yeah.
And others.
It's like what skills do you need to work on to be an asset?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
So that's the next step, is look at the things in your life, figure out where, like listen to last week's episode, look at this week's as far as what are the skills that you want to grow in, figure out what's the next step. How do you like take the next steps in learning each of those, and start that process now so you can become an asset.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for joining us on this journey to well-prepared life. Make sure you share this with people. Like we've said before, our goal is to help people, and it can't help people if people don't see it. So
That's good.
Set it out, share it, and we'll hopefully see you around.